We're spending $70 billion a year on teen suicide attempts. We're investing $30 billion a year in solutions to address this need, but yet 80% of teens are not getting the care that they need.
You know, we frequently talk about at Some Things how we are offering clinical experiences, but in a very conversational way. And I think part of why we have been so successful is because we have kids that are able to speak about what they're going through in a way that doesn't feel so pathologizing.
There's a lot of talk about AI across the entire healthcare ecosystem right now for very good reasons. But teens and young adults want real human connection. They don't want a chatbot.
So within 2 months of consistent peer support, the majority of youth who started in the program in crisis were no longer reporting suicidal ideation. Around a third saying that they felt that life was not worth living. 29% experienced thoughts of self-harm. 23% have active thoughts of ending their life. And in other words, these aren't just like stressed, worried kids. These are high-need, high-risk kids that we're serving who are often not able to access traditional care.
Kids are spending about 8.5 hours a day on digital entertainment. And, I think like everything we do has been about trying to get to kids where they are, because if you don't get kids engaged with the things that are meant to help them, it's not going to work. So excited to have you guys here. Oh my gosh, it's like my little family here on the podcast with me.
So fun.
I'm so thrilled to be here to talk about Some Things, our clinical outcomes, all of the good work that we've been doing, that you all have been doing. You all are the people who are making this happen, and I'm so excited to get to show the world. So we're going to go around and we're going to talk a little bit about the recent outcomes paper that we released. Before that, I want to do quick intros so that people watching this can get to know you all and your lovely faces. So, Nicole, why don't you start? Give a little quick intro, who you are, how you came to Some Things.
Wow. Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Nicole. So of all my friends here, I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I have been working in mental health for over 10 years now, worked predominantly in community mental health for a while. I was actually talking about my experience the other day to someone, and it's funny that I ended up working in peer support in a digital capacity, because I think all along my mental health journey, professionally and personally, there's always been a peer element, whether it's been working with homeless youth. Peers were always such a fundamental part of our work there, to working with the SMI population, to now being able to support teens through a digital medium offering peer support work. It feels very aligned for me to be able to do this from a clinical lens, but also connect all of my professional lived experience as well.
Cool.
Yeah.
Evelyn.
Hi, everyone. My name is Evelyn Cox. I am a public health practitioner by training, but have always been a youth mental health advocate, and I have my own lived experience, which is why I'm so deeply passionate about this work. I do operations here at Some Things, so I work in partnership with community and clinical partners to implement our program, to evaluate our impact. And yeah, I'm excited to kind of walk us through some of the data today.
And Evelyn's bashful, but she has her master's in public health from Johns Hopkins. So brag a little bit. Come on.
Big deal.
Yeah.
Leslie?
You also are, sorry to interrupt you, but you are very much so a jack of all trades.
Oh, thank you very much.
Yeah, no problem.
All right, Leslie, take us away.
Awesome. So nice to be here today. I'm Leslie Courtney. I'm Chief Commercial Officer here at Some Things. I came to Some Things after 25 years in the healthcare industry, both in a health plan, at a Blues plan for the first third of my career, and then really caught the innovation bug, and have sat essentially on the other side of the table since then, bringing positively disruptive solutions to health plans, providers, and employers, including everything from remote second opinion, telehealth, senior companionship, and then the last couple of years, teen mental health. Teen mental health resonates with me tremendously, both on a professional level within the healthcare ecosystem, because it's an area that has gotten not nearly as much attention as it needs to, really emphasizing the needs part. But I also have two kiddos in the age demographic that we service here at 15 and 21-year-old. And so living and breathing that every day, and the challenges that they and their social community are seeing, that's quite different from when I was in their seat.
So we are all here today talking about a recent clinical outcomes report that we did. And Evelyn, I want you to sort of help lead us through that. But before we do, I want to maybe have Leslie ground us in sort of like, just for anyone out there who hasn't had the full overview, like what Somethings is and sort of what the partnership that we had with the state of North Carolina that allowed us to collect this data. You can kind of give the overview of that, and then Evelyn can take us away and talk about some of the outcomes and research that we've seen.
Sounds great. So always my most favorite thing is to describe what Somethings does. So in the most simplistic form, Somethings is a mental health solution designed for youth ages 13 to 26, delivered through an app. We're meeting teens and young adults where they are, where all of us are, but most certainly digital natives. Gen Z and the upcoming Gen Alpha are engaging in ways that we have not typically innovated to meet in our healthcare ecosystem over the decades. We are bringing together technology through the app as well as evidence-based clinical rigor in a peer support model. What we do is we actually pair users, teens and young adults, with certified peer mentor specialists that have lived experience and are aligned in common interests so that teens can feel that someone they're interacting with really resonates with what they themselves are experiencing on a day-to-day basis and can be there for them on demand versus in a scheduled way. Some of the things that we've seen across our tens of thousands of youth that have interacted with our app since inception is that genuine human connection is really critical. It's part of our secret sauce, if you will. There's a lot of talk about AI across the entire healthcare ecosystem right now for very good reasons. But teens and young adults want real human connection. They don't want a chatbot to be interacting with them on something that's so incredibly personal. They also want a continuity of relationship, which is something that we've strived to do across the healthcare space for many years. And then last but not least, they don't really work in a scheduled world. And so they want to be able to access their peer mentors, which we allow them to do through the technology of the app, basically on demand and in near real time. We were so excited to launch the partnership with North Carolina with the Department of Health and Human Services, whereby we are offered to all teens in the state, approximately 1.2 million of them, at no cost to them. Immediate access to our app. One of the many goals in the partnership was to impact teens across all 100 counties within the state, which seemed like a really aggressive goal. Excited to share in some of our outcomes how we've done with that. And then, of course, make significant clinical impact while exceedingly satisfying the end user.
Awesome. Crush that. Great sales pitch.
Wow. I'm sold.
Before you jump in, it's interesting that, and I think just to sort of frame kind of who these kids are. Like I talk a lot about this when I talk about the kids that we serve. Like there was a report by Common Sense Media, I think maybe earlier this year, that said that kids are spending about 8.5 hours a day on digital entertainment. And your point about meeting kids where they're at, like unfortunately it is on their phones and it's in their digital channels. And I think like everything we do has been about trying to get to kids where they are, because if you don't get kids engaged with the things that are meant to help them, it's not going to work. So I'm really excited to have Evelyn share, that the hypothesis that we had very early on about giving kids that genuine human connection, making it super easy, has actually led to clinical outcomes. So without further ado, let's not bury the lead. Evelyn, can you talk about the research paper that we have done and put forth and some of the findings there?
100%. Yeah. Thanks for the setup, Leslie. Here at Somethings, we're leading one of the first clinical outcomes evaluation of a digital peer support program for adolescents. Really proud to be doing so. And the goal around this research is to answer this question of, can digital peer support move the needle, measurably improve youth mental health outcomes, and can it do so at scale? We're working in collaboration with our partners at North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services, some clinical experts in youth mental health, some research leads, to develop a pre-post outcome study design that really looks at users of our intervention, ages 13 through 19, so really high need population, across several measures of interest, including depression, which we use the PHQ-8 to measure, anxiety using the GAD-7, overall well-being using the WHO-5, and suicide risk using an ASQ-3 screener. And our study, dating back to January 2025, assesses across these outcomes to look at impact, engagement, satisfaction, and just overall sort of the user base, getting a deep dive into what we're seeing and how we're influencing the population across arms. So in terms of the teens that are represented in the study here today, we've served over 2,000 teens since January 2025. About a third of those met criteria for eligibility into the study. So we're looking at 685 teens who have engaged in some things for at least 2 months, have been active for a day per month at least, and are completing clinical assessments, have complete data. And on average, these are folks on average 16 years old, mostly young women. And they represent a racially and ethnically diverse cross-section of the state. We have 46% white youth, 25%, a whole quarter of our population identifying as Black and African American, 11% Hispanic and Latino, 7% Asian American, 9% reporting other or multiracial categories. The population I'm discussing here today, roughly 84% live and reside in urban areas, but we also saw really strong participation from youth in rural regions, 16%, which is really encouraging from an access and equity standpoint, right? We're reaching the youth who need it most. This is girls, this is youth of color, this is rural youth who are often facing the biggest barriers to care and often facing the greatest disparities in our outcomes. In terms of the evaluation of our program, let me give you a high level. So on average, these participants are using our program for about 100 days. That's, that retention engagement is strong. On average, they're sending 3 messages per day, opening the app roughly a third of days. So, there's some discrepancy there, but regardless, high engagement and long duration. Most importantly, this average time from sign up to connection on average is 6 hours, which is compared to what we see in clinical, outpatient treatments. That wait time is unmatched. At intake, we see teens who join our program are heavily clinically burdened. These are folks who are on average reporting moderate to severe depression and anxiety, really low well-being scores, and most striking, nearly 4 in 10 endorse at least one suicidal ideation question. So around a third saying that they felt that life was not worth living. 29% experience thoughts of self-harm. 23% have active thoughts of ending their life. And in other words, these aren't just like stressed, worried kids. These are high-need, high-risk kids that we're serving who are often not able to access traditional care and otherwise might not have if they didn't, come through to us. The good news here is that across all measures, we saw really strong, both statistically significant and clinically meaningful improvement, often within just 2 months. So across all measures, we see 77% of teens improve at least on one domain, 52% saw a clinically meaningful improvement, and nearly a quarter achieved full remission in at least one area.
Super cool.
Amazing.
Thank you for going through that too. I want to bump it over to Nicole now, because you're sort of the one boots on the ground seeing this happen, and the clinical outcomes that we're seeing and the engagement that we're seeing are really just data coming from what's actually happening. So can you maybe give like the sort of like actual color of like, what are these kids coming for? Like, what are they finding use from a mentor at? Like, what does it actually look like, the sort of teen and user experience?
Yeah. So I think Leslie and Evelyn kind of gave a lot of color around this, but in adolescent mental health, I think one of the things that's so interesting and also can be so frustrating about it is a lot of the times our clients don't necessarily know what they're coming in for. They know that something doesn't feel right. They maybe have a lot of emotions. They don't have the vocabulary to describe what those emotions are. And it really isn't until they feel like they have some sort of rapport with someone or feel seen by someone or feel heard by someone that we can actually start to piece together what that experience is. So while there are a lot of kids that come into the program who maybe have suicidal ideations or have a history of self-harming, a lot of the times what we're finding is those things come up within the first week or the second week of that happening. When we were designing this clinical model, one of the things that I remember we had a lot of conversations about is the importance of building the rapport, right? And you kind of hit on this. It's the engagement. It's What makes something so special is the willingness of the teens to actually engage in the thing. Whereas with traditional models, while those clinical outcomes are tried and true, um, as someone, and I know this is very sacrilegious to me being a therapist, but a lot of the times, even though we have the tools and the methods that are clinically sound, if the teen doesn't want to actually engage in the thing, there's really going to be no outcome to that. And so I love hearing all the amazing outcomes that we have seen, because I think even more so than some of the other more traditional clinical models that even I've worked with or I've studied or my peers have, this is something that is purely, especially in our contract in North Carolina, is so teen driven. And so there needs to be like an exclamation point on those outcomes, because, it really shows how dedicated these teens are to getting better, and actually how much we are moving the needle and helping these teens articulate what is going on and giving them the tools to actually make meaning of their experiences moving forward.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. And I always think about like the competition for us is not outpatient therapy or inpatient. If we were not there, these kids would have nothing. These are the kids that we're seeing are not kids who are going into outpatient and they want something else. We do have some of those, but a majority of the kids, it seems like, are really sort of finding us as an alternative to nothing. And the engagement, I think, speaks volumes to that. Let's go back over to Evelyn. Is there any sort of additional color that you want to give on any of the research method or the study, just to sort of help people understand a little bit more deeply about the impact? And then maybe we'll go to Leslie.
Yeah. I'm happy to sink my teeth into some of this data a little bit more firmly. So I guess we'll start with depression. I think that is something that I think across, both Nicole's clinical work, interfacing and seeing what teens are coming to us with, that is our highest reported outcome that we're seeing at intake and throughout, people wanting to focus on and people wanting to improve and work on to ultimately feel better. So as I was sharing with Nicole, depression is of huge prevalence among the population we serve. So at intake, nearly 70% of our youth experience moderate to severe depression when they're seeking support through some things, which is exuberantly higher than the baseline we see in the general population. Throughout the duration of their time in somethings, in an average of 2 months, about 2/3 of teens show improvement in their depression symptoms. 38% achieve a clinically meaningful improvement, which translates to a reduction of 5 points or more in the PHQ-9. 38% achieve a clinically meaningful reduction of 5 points or more in the PHQ-9, and 12% achieve remission, meaning their scores drop 10 points or more, which is truly unheard of. I think that's the statistic that we don't talk enough about. These are folks who are coming in with a depression diagnosis or meeting criteria for depression diagnosis and leaving without. So shifting to anxiety, over 50% of youth seeking support through some things experience moderate to severe anxiety. 2/3 of them improved on their GAD-7 scores over the course of 2 months. A third show clinically meaningful reduction, and 1 in 10 reach remission. So substantial improvements we're seeing in both depression and anxiety. In terms of well-being, on average at intake, scores are really low. We're seeing an average of 43 out of 100 on the WHO-5, and about 62% report improved well-being over the 2 months in our program on average. 43% actually saw a boost of their WHO-5 of over 10 points, which again translates to that remission statistic that we're really looking for. Anchoring in on folks who were experiencing suicidal ideation at intake, 1 in 5 teens who started with suicidal thoughts no longer did by follow-up. The median time to resolution was 16 days, so that's about 2 weeks. By 30 days, 40% had resolved. By 60 days, more than half. And by 90 days, nearly 60% no longer reported suicidal ideation. So within 2 months of consistent peer support, the majority of youth who started in the program in crisis were no longer reporting suicidal ideation. Think of the impact there.
Do you have a theory about why the impact on suicidal ideation has been so dramatic in terms of like what you've seen on the ground?
My gut instinct is I keep coming back to this accessibility piece, and the fact that a lot of the times these kids don't have the resources, whether that's within their own home, within their own community, within their own school, to get any sort of reprieve from what they're experiencing. When I think, I mean, for a lot of my clients that I've seen in my clinical practice and also at some things, suicide feels like the only thing that's going to allow them to get that reprieve, right? We see this sometimes in our kids that are self-harming, right? There's this need to have some relief from their current experience. And so I think when we have kids, especially when we're reaching people in more of the rural parts of the state or more disenfranchised communities who otherwise wouldn't have any access to some sort of resources to give them that reprieve, just having someone to listen to them, to validate their experience, to offer them different solutions that maybe because of the acuity of their own behavioral health experience. I mean, you said it, right? We're having a lot of kids come in with pretty severe depression. And when you are in that depressive state, it's very hard to start to think about other options, right? And so if we're able to get people to some sort of baseline to allow them to see other options and actually have maybe someone on their team that they've never had before, I think it instills a level of hope that a lot of our kids maybe have lost or never have had. And that's something that, this idea of hopelessness and finding hope is one of the reasons why I love peer support so much. I mean, if you grow up in a community where you are different or you have no representation, it's very hard to conceptualize the idea of what your life could look like. And so just having someone to speak to that has had similar lived experiences or can speak to similar lived experiences or can just like nerd out with you on a shared interest that maybe you've never found someone that can do that with. There's a lot of volume in rapport building that I think we really double tap on at some things.
Yeah. It's cool. It's like giving kids a reason to live, knowing that there are other people out there who care about them, who like what they like. Like, it's really cool. And I think what I find super exciting about all of this work is like, this is in the real world with real kids who are out there struggling. Like I think randomized controlled trials and real like formal clinical research is obviously needed. And we'll do that, as part of our journey as well. But it's so cool to think like the data that we're seeing is real kids out in the world who actually need it. I find that just like so exciting. So, and I think to that point, and maybe going over to Leslie here, like, can you speak to how you see this sort of clinical impact actually making an impact on sort of our healthcare system more broadly and how we think about how kids use outpatient resources, inpatient resources, how kids are ending up in crisis? Like, what is sort of your take on sort of how this extends more broadly to the impact that we're making?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess I would start with, before we sort of dig into like any type of statistics, is that we need to always remember that the population that we're serving are not little adults. They are still in very developmental stages of their life. They, like you very wisely mentioned, Nicole, may not have the words to describe how they're feeling. So if you just take a moment to sort of let that sink in and then think about how are they supposed to figure out how to advocate for themselves and then navigate the healthcare network, it really sets them up for feeling very lost. And so one of the things, and to sort of segue into how that really impacts sort of the clinical and sort of claims state within healthcare costs and access to care, is that one, again, these teens don't know how to access healthcare on their own. They may or may not have people around them that are able to do that. I will be the first to admit that after 25 years working in healthcare, I still have a hard time sometimes navigating the healthcare system. So there's that. But we also know that there's a significant problem. So 75% of mental health illness begins before the age of 24, right smack in our demographic. We're spending $70 billion a year on teen suicide attempts. We're investing $30 billion a year in solutions to address this need, but yet 80% of teens are not getting the care that they need. So when we even make the smallest interception of that cycle of lack of access, lack of continuity of care, being able to identify earlier on in so many cases, as we've seen with the teens in this study, we're preventing emergency visits. We are preventing readmissions, which neither of those are a place that any teen in mental health crisis wants to be in that situation, nor does it contribute to their long-term improvement. It often becomes this vicious cycle of getting worse and amplifying the need that they have. And so being able to identify these teens earlier, they're not really showing up on predictive models at health plans. They don't typically have comorbid conditions. They're really, really hard to identify. So we're there. And then being able to support them along the way so that they're less likely to drop out or become non-adherent to any other programming that they are participating in really adds up to an opportunity around cost savings, but also, very importantly, appropriate utilization of care. We then start to think much more population health oriented, that this now becomes even much bigger than just the impact on the teens, is really part of our entire access to care system.
Love it. Either of you guys have any thoughts related to that? Like, sort of, you're on the research side, you've been on the ops side. Like, how does hearing that impact sort of like square with the work that you're doing? Maybe like, I'll go to Nicole.
As you were talking, Leslie, I think about just when I was working with homeless youth, like a lot of the times because of just like a lack of resources or not knowing the resources, or even like you were talking about how hard it is for you to navigate the healthcare system as someone who's worked in healthcare. I got my master's in social work and I still have trouble navigating the healthcare system. And when I was working with a lot of these youth who are expected to navigate this on their own and also have so many other things that are stacked against them, whether it's mental illness or just not having basic resources to go to bed, shower, eat, right? And now we're expecting them to navigate a system that even the most educated of people in this space can't even navigate on their own. I mean, it's just a lose-lose situation. And so when we talk about inappropriate utilization of resources, I mean, it totally makes sense, right? Because no one, if you're in a crisis or you're experiencing something that you just like need help and don't know where to turn, of course you're going to go to the emergency room because in that moment it feels like an emergency, right? And so while I'm happy that these places exist, I also think there's a better opportunity to give people resources that they need, but also in an effort to like support them and not constantly pathologizing themselves, right? And continuing to isolate themselves, which is something that I think working with peers too allows people to have, we frequently talk about at some things how we want this to feel like you're getting, the clinical outcomes speak for themselves, right? We are offering clinical experiences, but in a very conversational way. And I think part of why we have been so successful is because we have kids that are able to speak about what they're going through in a way that doesn't feel so pathologizing. Whereas if you're in an emergency room or you're in an environment where you don't have resources, that is unfortunately, I think, the first foray into mental health that a lot of our teens have.
I wanted to tack onto that because I think we're talking about a population that's pretty low agency. They are oftentimes engaging with the mental health care system, not by choice, but, involuntarily or through the advice or care of their families, parents, guardians. And a lot of the time that is a huge predictor of our dropout that we see.
Yep.
70% of teens who are in treatment don't actually complete. A lot of drop-off persists. And I think the one thing that we are providing is a peer-driven service, is an alternative way to make mental health care engaging and to reach folks who have been so traumatized by their involuntary placements, by the involvement in a system that wasn't built for them, and are alienated by that. And how can we continue to support them in a way that meets them truly, truly where they are?
I think that's so cool. And it's almost like one of maybe the powers of peers is like we can sort of re-bring kids in who've been so jaded that they've said it's not for me anymore, because like we know the power of this stuff. Like we've all been personally changed by mental health interventions, by general positive psychology, right? And like, it's so sad to me to think that there are kids out there who've been so jaded because they had a crisis and they got sent to the ER and it was a terrible experience. This was not in the kid population, but I was speaking with someone recently who they went to the ER on a Friday night for a mental health crisis. and they weren't seen until Monday morning because there was no one there at the hospital. It's like, that is not acceptable. We can't allow that. And to be able to reach kids, you said this kind of briefly in there too, but to reach kids in 6 hours on average from when they sign up, that is a way that we can reinstill trust in mental health care for kids. And I think to maybe even speak on the financial point, because I'm sure that's relevant here too, like when somebody's spending the weekend in the ER and not getting treatment, the bill is just ticking up for that. So like, can you speak a little bit to sort of how you see the financial impact of this sort of peer-driven, as low cost as you can get it from the human services side? Like, how do you see the future impact of some things on kind of the financial picture?
It's always tricky to use things like ROI in any type of a conversation because we've, as a healthcare community, become so desensitized to it for lots of different reasons. But if we really analyze the individuals that we can correlate the clinical impact to, especially on the suicide ideation component in the study that Evelyn outlined, and we are preventing escalations to the ER, that we know that all the data is showing us that boarding, if you will, waiting for a mental health professional to be available for you is out of control. It is rampant. It is happening more regularly than not regularly. So if we can be getting individuals, these teens, these young adults, to lower cost levels of care, but at the same time, the right appropriate level of care, we're seeing significant cost savings. We also, one of the things that we do with our health plan partners is that we're able to create efficiencies for them as they're closing their HEDIS care gaps around FUH and FUM, because we're able to submit a claim to them indicating that based on the X number of days since discharge, we have reached out to them, we've engaged them in our solution, and they are having that immediate continuity of care versus a sort of more manual, cumbersome process where they're having to sort of tie together different data cohorts to see how their provider community is performing against these measures. So helping on the clinical savings front, helping on the administrative front, all really contribute to a positive path.
Super cool. Maybe I'll go to you here. Like, there are clearly areas in this that you got more excited about. And I'm curious, as someone who's been in the data, in the weeds, like actually, doing the research here, like what were you just like personally most excited to see? And maybe what are you excited about the future of some things in terms of the impact that you've seen?
I think I'm particularly interested in how we slot in within rural populations. I think there's, on top of emergency departments and rooms being a large catch-all for youth and adults, experiencing psychiatric crisis, there is this issue and concern around transport and replacement with outside of your community that can kind of reinforce trauma and negative outcomes down the line. And so being a connector, being within the ecosystem in rural communities in North Carolina and beyond, I think there's a huge opportunity for us to both be preventive and also maintain follow-up with our youth that we serve, regardless of where they go. I'm excited about the opportunity to be able to investigate particularly our impact within rural populations and to think about some of those ways that we are able to move the needle in a way that no other service can, just due to our virtual capabilities, the way that we have that continuity of care, and the huge outcome influence of our intervention when it comes to huge drivers of ED utilization, such as suicidal ideation and depression.
You've seen the kids and the interactions between mentors. Are there any sort of case studies or experiences that you could share that sort of like you think would paint a picture for like what is actually happening? Like what are the maybe even the things that you're most proud of that our mentors have done that you've seen? Like, what can you paint a few, maybe one or two case studies?
There's one case study that I always come back to that I know you are pretty familiar with too. But we had a client in our program who's fairly high acuity. She was, thankfully tapped into a lot of resources and just time and time again, just always in crisis, always having issues. She was in the program for about 6 months, I would say. And she has this famous quote where she had mentioned, if my therapist, my mom, and my psychiatrist and my peer tell me the same thing, I'm always going to agree with what my peer says. Because I think, to what we've consistently been talking about, while she was connected to all these resources, she never felt understood by any of them. And the fact that I'm trying so hard not to mention people's names right now, but the fact that the peer was able to see her in a way that none of these other resources had, there was this deep connection that she was able to develop where, though she has graduated from the program, she was able to get connected to resources that were much more aligned for who she was. She was much more engaged in hobbies in a way that she wasn't before. She got connected to a group of friends in a way that she wasn't before. And towards the end of her time at some things, her rate of escalation went down, I think, like 60%. So, I mean, that's one of many teens that we see in the program. We have a lot of teens in the program who historically weren't connected to any resources and are now messaging their peer every single day. So, I mean, you can only think about what this child was doing prior to being part of some things, right? Like what their experience was, how they were showing up in the world. And that, as we continue to expand, I think more so into the rural parts of the country, I've noticed that the level of engagement, I think, has increased and improved because teens have just been like chomping at the bit to find something that really feels aligned with who they are and what they need.
Super cool. What are you most excited about? Like, what is sort of the next phase as you think about, next year following?
I mentioned this before, and I feel like I've mentioned it a few times here, but I'm really excited to continue like how we can make things more accessible. You kind of touched on this with the rural populations, but like even within our own program, like how we define accessibility, whether that's offering mentorships in different languages to offering things that are more aligned for people's specific learning styles. If that's like an asynchronous program, if that's, a more gamified version of the service that we're offering, just different ways to get different kinds of kids involved. I know engagement has always been something that's been a really hot topic at some things, retention as well. And it'll be exciting to see how we change and evolve and move the needle once we have different things that can engage different types of kids.
Cool. Leslie, if you had to give advice to someone out there, either at a health plan or at a state, who is trying to address this problem, and you're not allowed to sell some things on them, like what advice would you give them about what we've learned from some things and the success here that they could just go and apply for whatever they're trying to do in their program, not specifically with us?
I think it is to be to really index on what programs are engaging the end users the most.
Mm-hmm.
Nicole touched on this earlier. I've said many times throughout my career, you can have the best in class programs in place, but if no one's using them, it does not matter at all. So I think that that would be my guidance to a health plan, is be really judicious about evaluating programs that are actually involving the end user.
Cool. I end all these podcasts with the same question, so you guys are going to get the same question too. We'll go around the rapid fire here. I always ask, if you could snap your fingers and change anything about youth mental health or just youth in general towards living a more well and flourishing life, what would you snap your fingers and do? Maybe go to Nicole first.
Oh gosh. There's so many things I would change, but I think just having like an easier healthcare ecosystem to navigate, and more accessibility to great resources, like some things to maybe stop them from feeling so isolated to begin with and making them feel empowered to take, their mental health care into their own hands at an earlier age.
Okay, cool. Evelyn?
The one thing that I would say is mental health stigma. I think we've come so far in the course of my lifetime, and I think there is a long way to go. As it comes to specifically youth, and specifically youth in rural areas that are facing loneliness and isolation to an unprecedented degree. These are folks we hear often who their mentor through some things is their closest friend or is maybe one of their only friends. Mm-hmm. And I think that is so disheartening to me as a young person, to me as someone who really feels the energy of others, I wish that was not the case. And I think if we talked about those issues a bit more, if we had some shared sense of dialogue around loneliness and the need for human connection among our young people, I think that would be what I would hopefully change. Yeah, I love
Awesome.
I'm a big proponent of resilience through every part of our life cycle. And I think that resilience is really hard to build on in our current healthcare model because it's transactional in nature. And I think to actually build up your point around stigma, even with the successes at every stage of an individual youth's mental health journey, we need to really index on the fact that it is a journey. It is a lifelong journey, and our health system set up in a transactional way doesn't currently support that. So that really limits these youth and their ability to be resilient when things come up in their journey.
Yeah. Got to bring the human connection back to mental health care. I agree with that. Thank you all. You all are lovely, amazing people, and I'm very grateful for the work that you're doing and getting to be here side by side with you. If you're out there, just know these are awesome people who are working on this very important problem. So thank you guys. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
This is
Thank
so
you.
fun.